Imagine putting a plate of food in front of a starving child, and instead of taking a bite, their entire body just completely physically recoils.
Right, they gag or they shove the plate away.
Yeah, tears start streaming down their face, and the room just descends into absolute chaos. We tend to think of eating as this deeply hardwired, infallible survival instinct, right? You need food, so you eat.
Exactly. But when that instinct breaks down, the family dinner table suddenly turns into a very literal behavioral battleground.
It really does. And welcome to today's deep dive. If you've ever sat across a dinner table from someone who just absolutely refuses to eat, or if you're, just fascinated by the hidden mechanics of human habits, we are going to extract the ultimate behavioral playbook for you today.
Yes, and we have a really compelling stack of sources on the table for this one. Clinical guidelines, ethics codes, peer-reviewed case studies from the field of applied behavior analysis, or ABA.
And I should actually mention, right off the bat, this deep dive is a very special edition. We're doing this in collaboration with the platform Behavioral Intelligence with Mara Sánchez.
Which is fantastic, by the way.
It is. You can find their amazing ABA educational content right on Spotify. And we've also teamed up with Cuisine on Instagram to really shine a light on how to feed kids when they just refuse to eat.
It's such a crucial collaboration because parents need this illumination, They need to know how to assist their kids without losing their minds.
Exactly. And to that end, we're also highlighting Amethyst Therapy Services today. They actually have a completely free guide on their Stand store specifically on how to help your child try new foods. So tons of incredible resources backing up our mission today.
Right. And our mission is really to look at the actual science of behavior to unlock entirely new ways to approach this extreme resistance. We are going to dig deeply into the underlying mechanisms here.
Because it's not just about, forcing broccoli down someone's throat.
No, not at all. Before a professional ever attempts to change a habit, there are these incredibly strict, highly regulated biological boundaries they have to navigate. And understanding the why behind those boundaries actually makes the interventions we'll discuss much more effective.
So let's start with the most massive roadblock that has to be cleared before we even think about rewards, consequences, or, getting someone to eat their spinach. The sources frame this as the hardware versus software rule.
I love that analogy.
Right, because you cannot fix a software bug when the computer's motherboard is literally on fire. You have to check the medical hardware first.
Absolutely. ABA Ethics Code 2.12 makes this a foundational mandate. You simply cannot ethically treat a biological problem with a behavioral solution.
Which makes total sense.
It does. And the ethics files we reviewed highlight a very severe case involving a child exhibiting intense self-injurious behavior.
Oh, the hitting case.
Yes. This child was hitting himself, causing severe visible harm. And the parents, who were obviously and understandably desperate, went to a behavior analyst and requested a formal behavior reduction plan to get the hitting to stop.
But the analyst pumped the brakes, right? They looked at the intake forms and saw this child had a documented history of gastrointestinal distress.
Right. GI issues, severe sleep deficits, migraines, and an inability to regulate his body temperature. So the analyst flat out refused to write a behavior plan.
Which, if you're that desperate parent, hearing no from a professional probably feels like total abandonment.
Oh, it has to be agonizing. But the analyst told them that the medical needs had to be addressed first. And 6 weeks later, after the analyst insisted on a thorough medical evaluation, doctors discovered the child was suffering from bleeding ulcers.
Bleeding ulcers. Oh my God. When you think about the physiology of an ulcer, you're talking about open sores in the stomach lining coming into contact with digestive acids.
Exactly. It's excruciating.
So the self-injurious behavior wasn't a tantrum. It wasn't, a plea for attention. It was pain referral. A child who can't effectively communicate is experiencing such blinding internal agony that hitting themselves becomes, a physical distraction.
A distraction or just a desperate physical manifestation of that internal suffering. If the analyst had simply implemented a behavioral intervention, say, systematically ignoring the hitting to avoid giving it attention.
Which is a standard behavioral move, right?
Right, standard for attention-seeking behavior. But in this case, they would have been actively suppressing the symptom of a severe medical crisis. They would have literally been gaslighting the child's nervous system.
Wow.
Critical thinking and ruling out physical pain must always precede any behavioral strategy. Always.
Okay, let me push back on this for you, the listener, because the line between medical crisis and stubborn habit can seem pretty blurry in the heat of the moment.
Yeah.
If a kid is just crying at the dinner table and pushing their broccoli away, how do you know if it's a behavioral refusal or, a hidden bleeding ulcer?
Well, the primary indicator is the historical pattern of the behavior. Sudden, drastic changes are your massive red flags.
Okay.
The clinical case studies highlight a boy named Noah. Noah suddenly stopped eating entirely. He wasn't just refusing the vegetables he always disliked, he was actively refusing his highly preferred foods.
So it's like his favorite snacks, his favorite desserts.
All untouched. Completely refused. When an established behavior changes that abruptly, the mandated first step is the doctor's office, not the behaviorist's clinic.
So if there's an ear infection making the jaw painful to move, or a subtle GI issue causing chronic nausea, no amount of verbal praise or reward charts will ethically fix the problem. You check the hardware first.
Precisely. You always check the hardware.
So let's say we've done that. The hardware is checked, the doctor gives a completely clean bill of health, and the child is physically capable of eating but is still adamantly refusing. You might assume that any credentialed behavioral expert could just swoop in, set up a reward system, and solve the problem.
You would assume that, but our sources draw a very rigid line here regarding the boundaries of expertise. Behavior analysis is not a universal plug-and-play science.
Right.
The ethics workbook details a scenario where a highly experienced behavior analyst, someone with an extensive, really successful background in general skill acquisition, is asked by a friend to help their 6-year-old nephew.
And this kid had a severe feeding disorder.
Right. Yes. He would only consume pureed foods and refused all other textures.
Now, this analyst has read a few academic articles on feeding interventions. They deeply understand the general science of positive reinforcement, but the ethical code mandates they cannot take the case.
They cannot. They are strictly required to refer the family to a colleague who specifically specializes in feeding disorders.
I found this boundary fascinating because theoretically, a reward is a reward. If I understand how to use positive reinforcement to teach a child to, tie their shoes or read a book, why can't I use those exact same principles to get them to chew a piece of chicken?
It comes down to the complex physiology of eating. Feeding disorders carry severe, immediate, and sometimes life-threatening risks.
Life-threatening, just from trying a new food.
Absolutely. Swallowing is a highly complex sequence of muscular contractions. It involves the jaw, the tongue, the palate, pharynx, esophagus. It requires the epiglottis to close over the trachea in a fraction of a second.
Okay, wow.
Yeah. If an unqualified practitioner incorrectly prompts a crying or resisting child to take a bite, that child can easily aspirate, meaning the food enters the lungs instead of the stomach.
Oh, geez. And that leads to aspiration pneumonia, which can be fatal. So an overly confident generalist could literally cause a child to drown in their own food.
Exactly.
Yeah.
True professional integrity means possessing the humility to know exactly what you do not know. You wouldn't want a brilliant dermatologist performing your open heart surgery, even though they both went to medical school.
Right.
The specialty matters because the physical stakes are simply too high.
Okay, so we have a medically cleared child, and we have a fairly specialized feeding expert in the room. Now we finally get into the actual strategic mechanics. How do you convince someone to engage in what the literature calls a low probability behavior?
Which is really just the clinical way of saying doing something they intensely want to avoid.
Right. Eating the vegetables. How do we do it?
Well, we have to look at how we structure the environment to build behavioral momentum. One of the most effective antecedent interventions, meaning actions taken before the challenging behavior even has a chance to occur, is the high probability request sequence.
I was actually taking notes on this section because I realized salespeople use this specific psychological momentum on me all the time. It's totally the micro-commitment strategy.
They do, and it relies on the exact same neurological principles. The sources provide a really good feeding example. Instead of walking up and immediately delivering the low-probability demand like, take a bite of your spinach, you give the child a rapid-fire series of easy, high-probability tasks.
Requests they're almost guaranteed to complete.
Yep.
So hey, sit down in this chair. Yes. Put your napkin in your lap.
Yeah.
Yes. Grab your fork. Yes.
Exactly. You are intentionally generating a pattern of compliance. Each small yes provides a minor dopamine hit, and that lowers the barrier to entry for the next request. You get their brain accustomed to the flow of following instructions.
And
then, seamlessly, right on the heels of those easy wins, you drop the low probability request Now take a bite of your spinach.
You are hacking the momentum, so the brain is primed to agree before it even has time to mount a defense.
That's a great way to phrase it. But momentum alone doesn't sustain a difficult habit long term. The sources say you have to pair that momentum with the Premack principle.
Premack principle. Break that down for us.
It's using a high probability behavior as a reinforcer for a low probability one. It's the classic first-then contingency. First the difficult task, then the highly desired activity.
Right. The text highlights a child named Sam. Sam actively dislikes practicing the cello, but he is completely obsessed with the video game Minecraft.
Right. So his mother structures the environment so that access to Minecraft is entirely contingent upon completing 20 minutes of cello practice first.
Okay, I have to ask the question that is inevitably popping up for anyone listening right now. Is the Premack principle just a sanitized academic term for bribery? Because eat your vegetables and I'll give you ice cream sounds exactly like a bribe.
It's a really valid question, but it's a vital distinction to make. Bribery is reactive, and it often occurs under duress.
Under duress.
Yeah. Bribery happens when the problem behavior is already underway. So a child is screaming in the middle of a grocery store aisle, and the stressed parent says, "If you stop screaming, I'll buy you a candy bar." That is a reactive bribe.
And it inadvertently reinforces the screaming.
Exactly. The child learns that melting down is the currency required to purchase candy.
But the Premack principle is proactive. It's an agreed-upon structure set up before any conflict begins.
Yes. And to make it work, you have to understand two key concepts: motivating operations, or MOs, and abolishing operations, or AOs. An MO increases the value of a reward. An AO does the exact opposite. It abolishes the value of the reward.
Okay, let me see if I have this right. An abolishing operation would be like offering me a cup of coffee as a reward for doing my taxes,
Right.
but I just drank 3 double espressos.
Yes.
The coffee has zero leverage. The operation is abolished.
That is a perfect adult equivalent. In Sam's case, if his mother lets him play 4 hours of Minecraft at his cousin's house in the afternoon and then asks him to practice the cello for Minecraft time after dinner, the intervention will completely fail.
Because he's already had his fill.
Right. The value of the game has been abolished by overexposure. To use the Premack principle successfully, you must actively control the environment to protect the leverage of the reinforcer.
You have to protect the leverage. I love that. But what happens when the resistance is so visceral, so extreme that momentum and perfectly leveraged rewards just bounce off?
It happens.
You try the high probability sequence, you offer the ultimate protected reward, and the child still clamps their mouth shut or physically gags. The reward simply cannot override the biological repulsion.
And that brings us to a landmark 2001 study by Patel and colleagues. They were treating a 6-year-old child with a pervasive feeding disorder and an extreme aversion to food textures.
How extreme.
The aversion was so severe, it triggered an involuntary physiological gag reflex. You cannot reward a nervous system out of an involuntary reflex. No amount of Minecraft will stop a gag reflex.
So how do you intervene when the body itself is rejecting the demand?
You rely on the micromath of desensitization, using a procedure called systematic fading. The clinical goal was for this child to drink a nutritional supplement, Carnation Instant Breakfast.
Right.
But they didn't just place a glass of the supplement in front of him. They started with a glass of pure water, which he was already comfortable drinking, and they added just 20% of a single packet of the nutritional powder to it.
20% of one packet in a full glass of water. That is essentially microscopic. The taste and texture change would be barely perceptible.
And that is the entire point. Over multiple, painstakingly slow sessions, once the child comfortably tolerated that baseline, they increased the powder. But they only increased it in 5% and 10% increments.
Wow.
Yeah. And once he was finally tolerating the full packet of powder in water, they began slowly fading milk into the water, just ounce by ounce.
It's like adjusting to a freezing swimming pool. If you sprint and jump straight into the deep end, your nervous system panics. Your chest seizes up, you gasp for air, your body goes into survival mode.
Right.
But if you walk down the shallow steps, pausing at your ankles until they go numb, then wading to your knees, letting your body acclimatize, you completely bypass that panic alarm. You eventually get your shoulders under the water without ever triggering a crisis.
That's a brilliant analogy. By using those microscopic 5% increments, the researchers were actively preventing the learner from experiencing what behavioral science calls an extinction burst.
An extinction burst is that massive, explosive spike in behavioral intensity, right?
Yes. When you push too hard, too fast, or abruptly remove a coping mechanism, the amygdala perceives the demand as a literal threat to survival. The behavior escalates dramatically because the nervous system is fighting for control.
So pacing the intervention at microscopic increments respects the learner's biological capacity.
Exactly. It proves that if your ultimate goal is 100%, you might need the humility to start at 5% and genuinely celebrate that progress.
Fading and shaping require an almost superhuman level of patience, though. You have to be content with 5% today and maybe 5% tomorrow. But that actually leads us to a very heavy segment of our source material. What happens when caregivers or even professionals run out of that patience?
It is a really difficult reality to confront, but when patience erodes, the interventions can easily cross the line from education into abuse.
The ethics files in our stack detail a highly disturbing case involving a clinical director. This director felt that a client's eating program was progressing too slowly.
And the client was a 6-year-old boy who was also noted to be overweight.
Yeah. To force compliance, this director made the 6-year-old stand on his feet for 3 hours a day with food held in his mouth, refusing to let him sit until he swallowed it.
3 continuous hours of forced standing. The psychological and physical distress inflicted on that child is just staggering.
That's awful.
And the sources emphasize that this was implemented without parental consent, it was not backed by any peer-reviewed literature, and it completely violated the core do no harm mandate of the profession. Specifically, it violated Code 2.15, which explicitly requires behavior analysts to exhaust all positive reinforcement procedures before ever considering a restrictive or punishing consequence.
Well, I'm going to play devil's advocate here, because we are talking about feeding, which at its core is about survival. If a child is literally refusing to eat to the point of malnutrition, doesn't the end justify the means?
You hear that argument, yes.
Right, like if enduring 3 hours of standing breaks a life-threatening behavioral refusal, isn't the harshness technically worth it to save the child's health?
No. The APA Ethics Code fundamentally and unequivocally rejects the concept that the ends justify the means. There are no exceptions. Utilizing restrictive, punishment-based procedures without exhausting positive strategies is unethical.
Period.
Period. But beyond the moral argument, from a purely biological and scientific standpoint, punishment is a spectacular failure for teaching complex skills.
Break down the biology of that failure for us.
Right.
Why doesn't the punishment work?
Because punishment triggers the sympathetic nervous system. It induces a fight-or-flight response. When a child is terrified, standing for 3 hours, their body is flooded with cortisol. Blood rushes to the extremities and away from the digestive tract. The throat physically tightens. Saliva production, which is necessary to break down food, essentially stops.
So you are demanding that the child execute a highly complex fine motor skill chewing and swallowing while simultaneously triggering a biological state that physically prevents their digestive system from working.
You are making it biologically impossible for them to comply. Furthermore, punishment does not teach a replacement skill. It only teaches fear and avoidance. The child might eventually choke down the food just to escape the 3 hours of standing, but they have not learned how to comfortably eat.
They have learned that the dinner table is a site of trauma.
Exactly. Behavioral interventions must produce outcomes that maintain under natural everyday conditions. You cannot naturally maintain the threat of a 3-hour physical punishment.
That is incredibly profound. Punishment teaches fear, it doesn't build a skill. It actively shuts down the biological machinery required to perform this skill.
Right.
Let's bring all of these threads together because we've covered an immense amount of ground in this deep dive. If you are listening to this and you're trying to guide a behavior, whether it's a child's extreme eating refusal or, honestly, even a stubborn habit in your own life, the scientific playbook is pretty clear.
Very clear.
First, check the hardware. Rule out physical barriers, internal pain, or hidden ulcers before you try to rewrite the software. Second, respect the boundaries of expertise. Know when a situation carries risks that require a specialist.
Yes.
Third, build momentum with small yeses and rigorously protect the value of your rewards from abolishing operations. Fourth, embrace the micromath of the 5% step. Bypass the nervous system's panic alarm. And finally, never sacrifice compassion for compliance, because fear shuts down the ability to learn.
I would urge you, as you listen to this, to look closely at your own environments. Consider where you might be trying to force immediate 100% compliance, either from yourself or someone else, when what the situation actually demands is a medical check-in or the grace of gradual fading. Stop fighting the panic alarm and start respecting the biology.
It changes the entire paradigm from a battle of wills to a structural puzzle. And again, definitely check out Amethyst Therapy Services on Stan's store for that free guide on helping kids try new foods and explore the amazing ABA content from Behavioral Intelligence with Mara Sánchez on Spotify and Karen and Cuisine on Instagram.
Incredible resources for anyone navigating this.
Absolutely. Now, before we sign off, I want to leave you with one final, highly provocative concept from the sources to mull over on your own. It's a phenomenon called behavioral contrast.
Oh, this is a fascinating one.
It really is. The literature notes that if parents strictly and harshly punish a child for thumb-sucking at home, the child will likely suppress the behavior when the parents are watching. But almost inevitably, the data shows the child will begin sucking their thumb significantly more often in a different environment, like a preschool.
The behavior suppressed under heavy pressure in one environment explodes in an environment where the pressure is removed.
So think about the implications of that. If you rigidly, forcefully control someone's eating behavior at the family dinner table, turning every meal into a high-pressure, strict battleground, are you accidentally creating a total binge scenario the second they get to the freedom of the school cafeteria?
It is a question every caregiver should seriously ponder.
The environment always balances the scales. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.